We are going to pass this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories, and thank all of you for coming and being present this morning. So I really appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Cumberford?
Thank you, Chair Khan. Thank you, Chair Chang Diaz. I am submitting formally testimony on behalf of banning conversion therapy. I'm also submitting it today on behalf of Lifting the Cap, and I'll just read an excerpt of the testimony that I'm submitting in writing. Honorable colleagues of the Joint Committee on Children and Families and Persons with Disabilities, I'm here today to offer my strong support for H-140 filed by Chair Kay Khan, and to ask that you help make Massachusetts the 16th state in the nation to rid ourselves of the arcane and abusive practice of conversion therapy. I am proud to have co-sponsored this legislation. This is the first testimony that I'm offering as a member of the Massachusetts Senate, and it's fitting as this legislation strikes home for me personally, as it has for many constituents in the Hampshire-Franklin-Worcester district. And I will tell you that I have received an outpouring of calls and emails from constituents and have visited with many who have asked me to testify before you today. Let me take you back, if you will, to my kitchen table in a home where I grew up. My parents couldn't have guessed that the news I wanted to share with them now many years ago would have been about my sexuality, about the woman I chose to love, but it was. Fast forward now in time, I'm married to my wife Anne, and I have 2 beautiful children. My parents like to say that they simply went from having 2 daughters to having 3 daughters. Of course, we all know it wasn't that simple, because homophobia, like that which drives conversion therapy, exacts a heavy toll, a heavy price from everyone. But now my 2 children are of a new generation, one that refuses to be put into a gender box and told who to love. They are surely worlds more evolved than I was at their age, as it should be. Their utter rejection of bigoted discrimination based on gender, sexuality, and sexual orientation gives me hope, as do the families of their friends who are now my constituents, who are embracing and defending their kids' emergent and diverse worldviews with the kind of love and courageous and tenacious care that it deserves and needs. It's now up to the legislature, to this committee, to ensure that all Commonwealth children of this generation are never wrenched backwards into an ill-gotten and brutal so-called therapy that far too many in our nation have endured, far too many young people in our nation have endured, or worse, perished because of. Thank you, Madam Chairs, for prioritizing consideration of this necessary and just legislation that would send a much-needed message at a dangerous time in our nation when hate crimes are on the rise and the Trump administration threatens the civil rights of trans individuals, that LGBTQ discrimination in Massachusetts has no place, that we will not give it a home. I respectfully urge the committee to give this bill a favorable report, and on behalf of my constituents, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in support of banning conversion therapy in the Commonwealth once and for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Senator, and just wondered if anyone has questions? Thank you again. I really appreciate your coming. Is that it? Okay, so moving on, I'm going to invite Neil. Did I say it correctly?
It's a good try. You got it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Neil Hubacher, and I'm from Newburyport. I'm looking to see if my senator is here, Ms. Oglio. I don't think she's here today. She is. Okay. Hi.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, and thank you for your staff that have been so kind to me. So, Madam Chairpersons and members of the committee, I'm just so thankful for your work for the state, and thank you for giving me a chance to share. I'm here in opposition to HB 140 and S70. As I mentioned, I live in Newburyport. From 2007 to 2016, I pastored a church in Beverly. And during those 9 years, I had about as many young adults and college students share with me their struggles with same-sex attraction. And what they shared was that they were looking for, some of them were looking for counseling that would allow them to address same-sex attraction while still aligning their lives with their faith. And so it wasn't that they were looking for conversion therapy, but they were looking for a way to address their same-sex attraction while still aligning their lives and their lifestyles with their faith. And so I'm glad that I had several counselors on hand that I could send them to. And what's great now is, you know, some of these guys that I've mentioned and gals, they're in financial planning, they're educators, they're in the hospitality industry, some of them are married in opposite sex relationships, some of them are single, some of them are moms, some of them are dads. But my point here today, as we've already heard, this bill is about youth. And so my concern is, or maybe my question for the committee is, are there LGBTQ youth, who I think will agree are some of the Commonwealth's most vulnerable, but are there youth who also will want to find counselors who will help them address same-sex attraction or transgender things, and also align them with their faith? And my fear is that if we proceed with this bill, my concern is that we will be eliminating for them some options that they would like to choose. In other words, I think we can all agree that a client, even if they're an adolescent, they have some right to self-determination on their therapy. And I just wouldn't want to eliminate that for them. I have written testimony, and I'll share that with you. And I've listed here several websites where you can find stories of people who wrestled with same-sex attraction, but wanted to align their lifestyles with their faith, and did so successfully. And it wasn't conversion therapy, just that those words just automatically put a label on therapy that I think is unfair and limiting. I just want to share that with you. I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Okay, yes.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Yes, sir.
And I also actually wanted to thank you for sharing that in the past you had recommended therapists to people from your church. One of the things we hear in Massachusetts is this really a thing? We live in Massachusetts, of course this doesn't happen here, and to hear somebody say that you did recommend folks, maybe you still do recommend folks, for me, from where I sit, validates the work we're doing. I may not from where you sit. And I just want to share that as somebody who went to my minister as an adult and shared, you use the word struggle, I'll use it as well, my own struggles with what it means to be gay, I got a very different response from them, and I credit Reverend Gilmore for the fact that I'm now married with kids as a state rep, but also an ordained minister. And so your testimony, I think, is powerful to show that there are multiple paths a minister, a special person in someone's life can lead them down. And the validation that this actually happens is important, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
yeah, thank you, sir, for coming this morning. I just wanted, I guess, a question back, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Are you aware that the legislation before us has an exception for religious leaders or faith-based counseling?
I am.
Okay, thank you for your
Should I leave
testimony.
the testimony
Yes,
with you, or?
great. If you could just hand it down at the end.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to hear from, I have Karen Cooper and Lynn Weaver.
My name is Karen Cooper. I live northwest of Boston. I'm a parent of a child who is. Pardon?
Just wanted to use the microphone so that everyone can hear you. Pull it closer.
Okay. My name is Karen Cooper. I live northwest of Boston. I'm the mother of a child who is transgender. And I'm trying to find a therapist to help her work through all of her experiences in her life, but when people found that she was transgender, that's all they wanted to deal with. She's been abused, we've had domestic violence in our lives, and nobody wanted to deal with those. I think those are contributing to what she is going through. I think people that are speaking for this conversion therapy ban are ignoring that these kids are going through mutilation of their bodies. I attended a P flag meeting where one woman said, my daughter was 16 and she's going to have a complete hysterectomy at 16. She'd already was having her breast removed a few months later. If they change their minds, and a lot of these kids, they're young, they're impressionable. My daughter got this idea of talking with somebody who was gay and transgender on the internet, but I didn't even know she was talking with. I don't know if she really is gay or transgender. She's so quiet. She suffers from depression, anxiety, selective mutism, and I don't want there to be a ban. A lot of these people are getting on the bandwagon of, oh, I'm going to help these kids. I don't think it's helping them. I think they need to be able to say, who am I? I think we all did that as teenagers. Who am I? What are my hopes and dreams for the world? Where I wound up is certainly way different from where I came in and thought about when I was a teenager. I just want my daughter to have that opportunity. Thank you.
And if you could pull the microphone closer.
I come here today as a nurse and a mom of 2 kids who are living as transgender. I wish I had a happier story to tell, full of hope and healing, but my son's 15-year journey through medical and surgical transition has brought him no healing and no less misery. He has never held a job that reflects his intelligence and abilities, which are high. His focus remains entirely on his struggles with gender. He suffers from serious mental health issues that go untreated, and he views his life through the lens of victimhood. I love him, and I worry constantly about him and his future. My younger daughter is bright, artsy, and musically gifted. She struggled socially in school. She has anxiety and depression. However, the focus of her treatment is now completely on gender. She has changed her name, started testosterone, and is planning on top surgery this year. She still has anxiety and depression, but now she will also be sterile, have a double mastectomy, and take powerful hormones for life. Her voice is deepened, and I grieve that I will never hear her voice again. Someday I will forget the voice that I loved so much, and it will be gone. I'm not allowed to call her by the name we gave her on the day she was born. That is termed violence. It's called dead naming, and not even a mom gets a pass on that one. But I ask you, what is the true violence? How is the mutilation of her healthy body, the very therapies that we are enduring, not violence? Perhaps in the future she will opt for a phalloplasty, in which the flesh of her forearm will be harvested to construct a fake penis. I challenge you to view pictures of this procedure. It is gruesome and the results are unconvincing. Ask yourself if you would want this for your daughter. What happens when I take my troubled child to therapy and the therapist is required to offer only one option, one single approach, transition, without the opportunity to explore underlying questions? What may be behind this pain? Is there other trauma that needs healing? Can we heal the hurt without cutting the body? And once we have permanently changed that beautiful body, what happens if it turns out that the body was never wrong to start with? What are we going to tell our daughters when they realize too late that they have destroyed their ability to have children? When they find that the wounds had other causes, other origins, and required other actions and other treatments? I plead with you to hear the parents and the many stories of young people that have changed their minds before or after transition. It happens. Please respect the privacy and dignity of families as they seek to find authentic healing, which is unique to every individual and is best determined by families and the therapist that they choose. Please leave room for every child to have the help that they need. Please vote no on these bills. Thank you.
Thank you, both very much for sharing your stories, and appreciate you came, and that we could hear your own pain. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Yes, I also want to just take a minute to welcome Vice Chair Senator Dizapia. She's joined us. Thank you very much. I just wanted to point out that Representative Cutler is also our Vice Chair. So thank you for being here. Okay, we're going to move on to Janet Lawlon, I believe. Is she here? No? Okay, then, is it Oliver? Okay. Riley Berglund?
We just thought we had to sign it, and I apologize.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, thank you. We'll recognize that you're here. Is that with Roger Garcia as well? Or?
Is he here?
Okay, great.
Good afternoon. My name is Roger Garcia. I work as a clinician. And beside being clinician, I work with children and families for almost 30 years. My main point here can be divided in 3 words. We have reality, fantasy, and utopia. Okay, I believe this room here is reality because I can feel, I can touch. Fantasy is something I create in my mind, and that's sometimes can be possible, sometimes impossible to become reality. If I come today and say to this court here, I am a Superman and I try to jump from the Empire State, this is not going to happen. Okay, and the utopia is again greater than fantasy. My point is, I can come in and try to create a perfect world, okay? But that's going to be utopia. I cannot come to everybody, convince everybody by words. That's impossible. As a clinician, I can come to a child, I can give him the best advice, but it'll be up to him to make his own choice. It's not up to the clinician. I cannot force nobody to create his own choice. It'll be up to the person. But if you come to the point where I have no choice, come to the point where I cannot educate my clients, it's becoming very difficult for my clients because if we allow 4 years old to make changes in gender, when he be 18, it'll be too late for him to have any regrets about that. And that's my point here, I try to bring here. I believe the freedom for this nation, the freedom for the state, we need to accept both sides, okay? I cannot only come and say this side is right, this side is wrong, okay? I love everybody. I love straight people, I love LGBTQ people, I love everybody. But my point is, as a professional counselor, I'm supposed to have a right to help the people whatever they wanted to be helped. I think that's not right. I come and say, oh, I just can give you this advice to you because the other advice if I give to you, I'm going to lose my license, or I can go even to jail. And that's my point I try to bring here today. I try to bring freedom. Everybody has a right. Nobody's better than nobody. And that's why we need to respect both sides. Any question?
Are there any questions? Thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate that you came today. I'm going to move on to, let's see, I have Arlene Isaacson and Ben Klein.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Arlene Isaacson. I'm the co-chair of the Massachusetts Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus. we've been doing lobbying on LGBT issues for decades. Not me, thank you very much, not for decades. But I'm also the co-lead of the Coalition to Ban Conversion Therapy for Minors, and in that capacity, I'd like to say the following in support of House Bill 140. First, just to be clear about what conversion therapy is, if it isn't already so, it is a therapeutic technique, but it is one which has been hugely discredited by the profession, and it purports to change people's sexuality and gender identity from gay to straight, trans to cis, never the other way around. So it comes in with an automatic agenda about what the outcome must be. LGBTQ folks have known for a very long time that these so-called treatments are bogus. We laugh about them, we joke about them, we talk about praying away the gay, and have for a long time. Mental health professionals now agree that it's not medically valid, it's not a medically valid treatment, and indeed it can cause serious psychological harm to the patients, particularly if they're kids. And, as you'll hear later, it can leave families seriously damaged. You've heard already that many of the psychological and psychiatric associations that people know and respect have opposed conversion therapy and consider it to be either a sham, at best ineffective, or tantamount oftentimes to emotional child abuse. What's the harm that's done to these kids? Well, it's despair, it's depression, it's anxiety, it's addiction, it's self-harm, and unfortunately sometimes suicide. I will share with you just one personal anecdote about an acquaintance of mine, a woman named Karen, who when she was very young, she knew when she was very young that she was lesbian. I don't know how she figured it out that early. And when she became a teenager, now she didn't have words for it back then, but when she became a teenager, her parents and her doctors decided to institutionalize her so that she could receive electric shock treatments to make her straight. And of course it didn't work. But back then, electric shock therapy was considered a reasonable course of treatment by some. Today, electric shock treatment is discredited, of course, as a tool to convert gay people to heterosexuality. And the notion of institutionalizing a child and giving them electroshock would be viewed as today's standards child abuse. Well, conversion therapy is similarly situated. It was once thought to be a reasonable approach to curing what they considered to be the illness of being gay or trans. And like electroshock, these theories have now been debunked. So I leave you with this one thought. This conversion therapy can do tremendous harm to the kids, and it can be a very long-lasting harm. For those of you who were around in the last legislative session, you may know that this bill, the chairwoman's bill, was engrossed by both the House and the Senate. It would have been enacted had the clock not run out on the very last day of the session. So to those of you who did in fact vote for the bill last year, we give you our sincere thanks. And we can assure you we won't try and convert you to a different position. Sorry to interrupt. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Khan and Chair Chang-Diaz. My name is Ben Klein. I'm a lawyer with GLAD, GLBTQ, Legal Advocates and Defenders. And I wanted to begin by focusing us all here today on what this bill does and does not do. Because it's a very narrowly crafted bill that prohibits one thing, and that is a practice that changes an individual's sexual orientation and gender identity. It does not, or gender identity. It does nothing else and does not otherwise prescribe speech, opinions, or viewpoints. And as a bill that focuses on regulating a practice of healthcare, that is squarely within the state's well-established and long-standing police powers to regulate the conduct of healthcare, especially when we're talking about minors who are particularly vulnerable. I would like to take, in the time I have, a few moments to actually focus on a Supreme Court case from June 2018, which some of our opponents are positing provides grounds to challenge the constitutionality of conversion therapy laws, and to provide you some context there. That case, the National Institute of Family and Life Advocates versus the SARA, sometimes referred to as NIFLA, deals with completely different legislation. It does not deal with a statute that regulates professional conduct like this bill does. That was a case where California passed a law requiring pregnancy crisis centers which oppose abortion to post notices making people aware of publicly available options for family planning. In the context of deciding that case, and the opinion was written by Justice Thomas, the Supreme Court actually affirmed laws just like this one. Because what they said was this court has upheld, that's the Supreme Court, this court has upheld regulations of professional commerce or conduct that incidentally burden speech. And the court said that those kinds of restrictions are not prohibited by the First Amendment. And they gave us an example. Justice Thomas gave us an example, malpractice claims. So if we were to accept some of the opponent's assertions that you can't regulate conversion therapy because it's speech of the therapist, there would be no such thing as a malpractice claim against a psychiatrist. There would be no ability of the Board of Registration in Medicine to discipline a provider who is providing substandard care to a patient because that would all be speech. But what the Supreme Court has said, and what is the prevailing view among the courts, and all the appellate courts have upheld conversion therapy so far, is that when the speech is incident to conduct such as providing medical care, that is well within the state's regulatory authority, and that is why these laws are constitutional. And the Supreme Court decision of 2018, June of 2018, actually affirms the constitutionality of these bills and does not honor them.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Do we have any questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Attorney Klein. And so I read the case because I had heard some of the similar arguments raised. And I just wanted to have you expound on a couple of the points that you made. One, in terms of professional speech versus professional conduct. Can you just maybe expound upon that? So it's your view that this legislation before us would purely be considered professional conduct and not just speech, and therefore not implicating NIFLA? Is that
That's
fair
correct.
to say?
That's correct. So one of the things that was going on in the Supreme Court decision, looking at this notice provision under California law that had to be posted, was what is, the court was asking, what is the concept of professional speech under the First Amendment, and what level of scrutiny should professional speech be given? And that's really a separate question. And what the court then did was go on from there, after striking down California law, saying, no, they found it unconstitutional to compel these clinics to provide these notices. But they said there are certain kinds of speech that we do understand to be simply incidental to conduct. And they specifically referenced, it said, the First Amendment does not prevent restrictions directed at commerce or conduct from imposing incidental burdens on speech, and professionals are no exception to this rule. And then they gave us the example, torts for professional malpractice, for example, fall within the traditional purview of state regulation of conduct.
To follow, if I may, Madam Chair. So would you also agree that pure talk therapy, as they call it, for lack of a clinical term, is also, even though we think of it as speech, it's actually professional conduct? Is that fair to say as well?
That's right. It is.
The courts would say that.
It is conduct, and that's what the appellate courts, both appellate courts in our federal system that have ruled on conversion therapy laws have upheld these laws. But I do want to just say, in light of the Supreme Court's decision, that some of our opponents have been emboldened by this decision and have taken, I think, out of context some of its lines to challenge these laws. And so we should not be surprised if that at some point we have, on the federal trial court level, we have almost 900 federal trial court judges in the United States. And there was one recently in Tampa that did say that these laws were really talking about pure speech. Now, I think that decision was wrong. It was poorly reasoned. It ignored the language in the Supreme Court decision that I just read to you. And a few weeks later, another federal trial court said these laws are upheld under every possible level of scrutiny under the First Amendment, and they don't regulate speech. And the point that I just want to leave with you in terms of context of the development of the law is that given the number of trial court judges we have, it's not surprising that you could find one who might take a view that we think is unfounded, but that doesn't change the legal landscape. The prevailing view in American law is that the state's authority to regulate the conduct of healthcare is well established, and the Supreme Court said that in the NIFLA decision.
Attorney Klein, if I could just make follow up, thank you, Madam Chair, for your patience. Is it fair to say that the Planned Parenthood Casey decision will also support this idea that, I think that was regarding informed consent, that this whole idea that even though the doctor was regulating speech, it still was professional conduct? Would you agree that that supports the whole line of reasoning that this is conduct, not speech?
I would agree with that, and here's what the Supreme Court said about that case. They said that law that you're referring to regulated speech only as part of the practice of medicine, subject to reasonable licensing and regulation by the state, and upheld that provision. So speech is obviously part of almost everything we do. It doesn't mean that everything is therefore subject to First Amendment scrutiny.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. I'd like to call Dr. Carol Allen and Kate Thompson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairs and committee members. Thank you for hearing my testimony. My name is Dr. Carol Allen. I'm a pediatrician with 40 years practice experience, testifying on behalf of the Massachusetts chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics in strong support of House Bill 140. As a trustee of the Massachusetts Medical Society, I am also asked to say that the Medical Society would like to be recorded in support of this bill too. The evidence is clear. LGBTQ children and adolescents do best when supported by caring adults, especially their parents. When they experience rejection, they are at high risk for depression, suicide, and self-harming behaviors. The American Academy of Pediatrics is opposed to conversion therapy, stating, I quote, referral for conversion or reparative therapy is never indicated. It is not effective and may be harmful to LGBTQ individuals by increasing internalized stigma, distress, and depression. I am also speaking to you as a parent. I still vividly recall the day in 1992 when my husband and I discovered that our older son was gay. Despite obvious clues, we were blindsided and struggled to adjust our expectations about who he was and what lay in his future. A year or so later, his younger sister experienced suicidal thoughts and later came out as lesbian. Both times there was a lot of pain, family anguish, and hard work to deal with our new reality, but we emerged from it with stronger relationships than ever. And 3 years ago, that younger sibling, who's now 38, transitioned to his true identity as a man. We are so proud of both our children and the productive lives they have crafted for themselves, their spouses, and their children. I tell you this story so that you can understand that parents may be caught off guard when a child comes out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning. Parents love their children and will be searching for answers on navigating this new reality. The kids in turn crave and need their parents' love. They are looking to please them, but also to find their own identity. That charlatans will take advantage of the vulnerabilities of both parents and children based upon their own homophobic ideologies or possibly even mercenary motives is abhorrent and dangerous. House Bill 140 will prevent significant emotional harm to young people and families, and it will save lives. Similar legislation has been passed in 15 states and the District of Columbia. I urge you in the strongest terms not to delay any further its passage in Massachusetts.
Thank you very much for your testimony and sharing your own story.
Good morning, Chairs, Chairman Diaz, and Chair.
Would you pull the microphone closer?
Is that better? Good morning, Chairs, Chairman Diaz, and Chairs Khan, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning in strong support of House Bill 40. As you know, this legislation seeks to ban the deceptive and harmful practices of conversion therapy by healthcare providers with youth under the age of 18. My name is Dr. Catherine Thompson. I'm here today as a licensed clinical psychologist from Boston Children's Hospital, also one of the lead organizations of the Children's Mental Health Campaign. We support this legislation because we know that so-called conversion therapies are bad for kids. In addition to my role as attending psychologist on the Psychiatry Consultation Service at Boston Children's Hospital, I'm an instructor in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. I'm the co-chair of the BCH Rainbow Consortium on Sexual and Gender Diversity. I run BCH's Safe Zone training, which is a training on gender and sexuality awareness for our employees. And I also see patients in private practice, and the vast majority of my patients identify as LGBT youth. And last, but I think certainly not least, I'm a parent and I identify as a queer woman. My wife and my amazing kid are the loves of my life. I want to talk to you about 3 things today. First, conversion therapies do not work. As we've said here today, they've been disavowed by all major medical and mental health associations. In fact, the American Psychiatric Association has publicly condemned conversion therapies for over 20 years at this point. Many evidence-based therapies and approaches to support young people who are questioning their gender and sexuality exist. I am happy to provide you with literature to back this up. One example of an evidence-based approach in working with gender and sexuality minority youth, or those questioning their gender and sexuality, is right at Boston Children's Hospital in the Gender Management Service, where a well-trained and affirming interdisciplinary team of medical and mental health professionals guide youth through this process of identity formation. It's important to highlight here that supporters of conversion therapy often point to a very small number of anecdotal studies. I probably don't have to tell you that the gold standard to establish evidence-based practices in medicine, psychiatry, psychology has to include randomized controlled trials. The studies quoted in support of conversion therapies are fraught with bias. They are not based on rigorous methodology, and they rely on retrospective data. Number 2, not only are conversion therapies ineffective, they are truly harmful, and we have evidence to prove this now. There are a number of studies in peer-reviewed journals that show associations with negative long-term outcomes, including increased depression, anxiety, suicidality, emotionally dissatisfying relationships, poor self-esteem, and long-term sexual dysfunction.
So I apologize. I'm going to have, if you could maybe hand over your testimony.
Very quickly, yes. The third thing I want to say is being gay, being trans, being queer, and being gender diverse is not a problem, it is not a disease, it does not need to be fixed. Gender and sexual minority individuals are not inherently at risk for negative outcomes. When we support these youth in our schools, communities, hospitals, they do well, and they do just as well as cisgender and heterosexual youth. We have been in Massachusetts, we've long been a leader in LGBTQ rights, and there are many things we get right, and it's time to pass this legislation and take the lead.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a question. So to either of the doctors, could you describe some of the practices in conversion therapy that you've seen that have led directly to some of these harmful results that you referenced?
Yeah, generally they focus on trying to change someone's mind about their sexuality or their gender identity in a way that in support of talk-based therapy that would use strategies, evidence-based strategies like cognitive behavioral therapy would use strategies like motivational interviewing to let the patient take the lead on their own identity formation rather than instructing someone on how to get rid of their sexual orientation or gender identity.
I would say that I'm not familiar with actually what happens at conversion therapy so much as it is a form of rejection from the parent, and there are good studies to show that it's acceptance that leads to successful growing up for these kids. That, as she mentioned, that when a child is rejected by the parent or feels that way, because, and I think if they're referred for to be converted, they would feel that way. Those are the kids who are at risk for suicide and for depression and for harming themselves and engaging in all kinds of behaviors that are harmful. But kids who are supported do great, and we have good documentation.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I may. Can I just ask, can you specifically on talk therapy, so do you support talk therapy as part of conversion?
I mean,
Well,
it's
you-
partly a semantics thing. Talk therapy includes lots of things because the mechanism of therapy includes talk. So some people use talk therapy to describe things like cognitive behavioral therapy. Some people use talk-based therapy to describe non-evidence-based strategies for therapy.
Just because some of my concerns around this particular piece of legislation is in that section of talk therapy, some of the exemptions and things like that, is concerned. I was kind of wondering when I heard you say that you're in favor of it, I just want to make sure I understand your definition of it so I can educate myself on it.
Yeah, so I would say that talk-based therapy includes evidence-based strategies like cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jen.
I have one question. So you talked about credible and rigorous studies. As a public health person, I understand what you're describing there. To your knowledge, are there any credible and rigorous studies that report on the percentage of people who are transgender who decide to go back to the gender that they were assigned at birth?
I think the numbers are very, I don't know, I can't answer exactly, but the numbers are very low of kids who have been helped through, at whatever age, through to become the person that they feel that they are. Very, very few either regret it or go back the other way. And sorry, I don't have this actual numbers.
The important thing that I would add there is that in all research, it's important to define exactly what we mean by that. So it's very normal for kids of many ages to have periods of questioning their gender or their sexuality. And some of those studies report very high numbers of people changing their minds because they may be reporting on periods of time where we would expect all kids to question gender and sexuality at periods of time.
Great, thank you.
I just wanted to quickly add thank you. Parents are parents. You know, I love my mom, I love my dad, I would never want to trade them or their support in for anything. But I can only wish that every LGBTQ person in our Commonwealth and country had the supportive parents like you two I know are for your kids. I don't have that magic wand, I can't make it happen overnight. Parenting is the hardest job I think any of us have ever sought to explore. But when it comes to loving your kids unconditionally, I really appreciate what you're doing for your kids, and I can only wish it across the Commonwealth.
It is a process, and and that's why it's really important that we support the parents with credible options, because you're not going to automatically necessarily be accepting that first moment. I certainly had to go through some transition or some evolution, I would call it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to call, I'd like to call, we have a couple of youth and volunteers, Catherine O'Connor, Michelle Samuels, and Elliot Lazarova. Wait.
Chair Khan, Chair Chang Diaz, and other honorable members of this committee, thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is Catherine O'Connor. I'm 15 years old and I attend Brookline High School. This past year, I worked on the Yes on 3 and Equality Virginia campaigns, both defending LGBT non-discrimination laws. I'm currently an intern at the Edith Baker Middle School, and I also happen to be a queer, gender non-binary young adult. I'm testifying here today in support of House Bill 140, an act relative to abusive practices to change sexual orientation and gender identity in minors. When I was in middle school, I was not as outgoing as you may perceive me today. I suffered bullying of all types, pushing and hair pulling, cyberbullying and threat making, and a constant flood of rumors about me. Classmates called me homophobic slurs, questioned why I dressed the way I did, and took shots at my family. This led me to fall into a Great Depression. I started to hate myself, my body, and I didn't understand why I was so wrong all the time. I developed negative coping habits, such as self-harm and a poor relationship with food and sleep. I skipped school a lot and stayed in my room, failing all of my classes. Finally, my family brought me to therapy. Though a bit rough at first, it has greatly helped me become stable, realize my LGBT identity, and regain a sense of happiness. Therapy has reaffirmed my identity, making me feel so much more comfortable with myself. I'm here to say that I strongly believe that I would not be here today if I were put in conversion therapy. I am certain that I would either be institutionalized, missing out on even more of my education, or even dead. As an intern at a middle school today, I work in improving school culture. I see students like me every week, students who are struggling. I notice casual homophobic remarks and a culture of bullying and ignorance. Not all students are as fortunate as me. Not all students have loving and supportive families. Not all students can afford therapy, and not all students will receive the kind of help that I did. Everyone deserves to be affirmed for who they are, just as I was. Please do not stand by while abusive practices continue to minors in the state. I ask that you issue a favorable report of House Bill 140 and take swift action so that all youth growing up in Massachusetts today are able to seek affirming care. Thank you again for allowing me to testify.
Chair Khan, Chair Diaz, and honorable members of this committee, thank you for letting me testify before you today. My name is Michelle Samuels, and I am speaking to you today in support of House Bill 140, an act relative to abusive practices to change sexual orientation and gender identity in minors. I am the senior communications writer and editor at the Boston University School of Public Health. I am a transgender woman who was very involved in the Yes on 3 campaign last year, and I am the daughter of 2 therapists. And I support this bill because I've been very lucky. My parents have been tremendously supportive, and because they are a psychologist and a marriage and family therapist who was on the New Hampshire Board of Mental Health for many years. That support has also meant to me an additional message. It has meant that I'm not sick, that my sexual orientation and gender identity do not constitute a mental illness. In short, that there is nothing wrong with me. But that is not the only message that I have received, because we all live in a world where transgender women are constantly depicted as sick, as deluded, as dangerous, as disgusting. And I was not immune to that message. I was not able to feel pride in being a transgender woman until I worked on the Yes on 3 campaign and got to know some incredible queer and trans young people, many of whom came out or began to understand themselves in the time that I've known them. And I've felt so proud of them. And that has allowed me to feel proud of myself. It has also made me feel fiercely protective of these kids and of kids who are like them but maybe less lucky. Trying to change a minor's sexual orientation or gender identity is abuse, and it has long-term ramifications for those who are subjected to it. But it does not only affect them. If conversion therapy is a legal practice for behavioral health providers, then the message it sends is this one: that an incredible part of these kids is in fact an illness, that there is something wrong with them. This bill will protect some of them from an abusive practice that has no basis in evidence and that is widely opposed by the mental health and pediatric health and wider health communities. But it will also protect many more of them from the message that they are sick, that they are wrong, that they have any reason not to be proud of themselves. So I urge you to issue a favorable report for House Bill 140. Thank you so much for your time and attention and for your action.
Thank you very much.
Dear Chair Khan, Chair Chang Diaz, and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Elliot Lazarov-Wang. I'm 14 years old and a freshman at Brookline High School. I'm speaking in support of House Bill 140.
Can you just pull it a little closer?
Yes, sorry. An act relative to abusive practices to change sexual orientation and gender identity in minors. Thank you for letting me testify in support of this bill. Keeping children safe and making us feel welcomed and accepted into society should be a norm. And passing this bill would allow abusive and inhumane practices of conversion therapy to be banned, letting kids feel safe and secure in their own identity without worrying about the backlash and abuse that they could face when coming out. This bill is very important to me and so many other kids who have been put through abuse when being open about their identity to others. While visiting my family in Bulgaria, I've had people be violent to me because of who I am. And rocks and fireworks thrown at me and into my yard, and the troops being shot at with BB guns. I was not able to feel safe in that country, let alone feel safe in my own house there. Being able to come back home to safety is what I always expect of the United States, especially Massachusetts, a state where we pride ourselves in equality and acceptance of others and their differences. Still having these brutal ways of trying to change a part of someone's identity in the state is painful to hear about, especially as it has not been banned yet. Although the violence that I faced in Massachusetts is not compared to other places I've been, I still have a constant fear of someone coming after me because of who I am. No one should ever be afraid of being themselves, and that's why I'm in support of this bill. It is never too early for change, especially when it comes to the safety of minors and protection against abuse. While we can't change what has happened in the past and the pain and violence that has been inflicted onto so many children, we can pass this bill that protects our future youth from pain and abuse. Keeping the youth safe is so important, and having this bill passed as soon as possible will benefit so many children and save them from cruel, unnecessary punishment. I ask that you issue a favorable report of this bill, as other states look up to Massachusetts and the progress we've made to better our state. We should continue to make progress in all aspects that we can and set an example for others. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home, and no child should ever be afraid to be themselves. I thank you for your time, and I hope you can see the importance of this bill for the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. And you all kept it in your 3 minutes, so that's even more impressive. I just wonder if there are any questions. Okay. Seeing none, thank you again for coming and sharing your stories. I'd like to call Seth Anderson and Michael Ferguson and Matthew Shirka.
Chair Chang Diaz, Chair Khan, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today in support of H-140. My name is Seth Anderson. I'm a PhD student at Boston University. My dissertation is about the history of conversion therapy in America. I myself never experienced conversion therapy, but my husband did for 8 years. And I'm before you today to testify not only about the long-term harm conversion therapy inflicts upon individuals, but also to the very real harm it causes to families and to relationships. When I first met Michael, we got to know each other. It came up that he had gone to conversion therapy, which surprised me because I didn't even know people still did that. When I asked him questions about it, he spoke with great difficulty. To talk about it was so upsetting to him. But I learned that the therapy, the so-called therapies that he had participated in with others, often involved nudity, often involved reenacting past abuse, oftentimes past sexual abuse, beating effigies of their mothers. He was encouraged to foment antagonistic relationships towards his parents and his siblings. This infusion of animosity towards his family members had lasting impacts that we dealt with for years. I remember vividly the day that he told me about this because I felt as if the world had stopped spinning. It broke my heart to know that a sweet, gentle man as he is could be wrapped up in something so humiliating for so long. In the hopes that he could change something within him that never could be changed nor needed to be. From our earliest days together, I've spent many tearful nights with him as he's tried to reconcile the shame, the embarrassment, and the pain that these experiences have caused him. I've been next to him in the middle of the night when he's woken up soaking wet with sweat, gasping for breath from nightmares, and I held him close to me and told him everything will be okay. Massachusetts youth and families have a right to expect that a therapist practicing under a license from the state will not put them at risk of severe harm, including depression, substance abuse, suicidal thoughts, that multiple studies have shown to be common among people who participate in conversion therapy that I can attest to are real. This bill not only protects children from these harms, it also protects parents from being defrauded by practitioners of these abusive practices. Because conversion therapy is fraud, we've actually proven this in court, that conversion therapy is consumer fraud. No one has the right to psychologically, emotionally, physically, or spiritually abuse LGBT youth. LGBT children don't need to change. Cultures hostile to LGBT people need to change. I urge you to follow the lead of other states and municipalities in banning conversion therapy, and I urge you to issue a favorable report on H-140. I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
To the committee chairs and to the honorable members of these committees, I sincerely thank you for the opportunity to be here today and share part of my story with you in support of H-140. By way of personal introduction, let me start by saying I'm a lifelong student of the sciences, and this is an important point. I got my PhD in bioengineering. I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Cornell University in human development. I'm currently doing a second postdoctoral fellowship in cognitive neurology, and yet in spite of my lifelong commitment to the sciences and the scientific method, I am embarrassed to say that I was sucked in and duped by the charlatans who peddle conversion therapy with junk science. Conversion therapy is not therapy. It is not scientific, and it is most certainly not compassionate. I'm here to tell you something that you already know, which is that love is not a symptom of pathology. The combination of homophobia and false blame on parents that are so common in conversion therapy were extremely harmful to my family unit and to my well-being. As a young man, I grew up with a close family connection to my parents and my siblings. However, these relationships were nearly shattered by conversion therapy. Conversion therapists told me that my parents were to blame for my homosexuality, that my father was too distant, my mother was too overbearing. In group therapy sessions that I participated in, men beat effigies of their mothers, and they were instructed to channel primal rage toward their fathers. At a point in my life when I needed the emotional support that my family could provide to me, I was being offered an emotional poison that became toxic in all of my family relationships. Because of the lies of conversion therapy, I allowed myself to become filled with bitterness. I went deeper and deeper into pathological loneliness, emotional isolation, and self-hatred. After nearly a decade, however, I was able to escape the downward spiral that conversion therapy creates and to rebuild my relationships with my family. Unfortunately, not everyone is so lucky. I wish that I had known how dangerous and outright